Yeah, it's pretty brutal compared to the 70 degrees we saw yesterday.
Oh
So,
yeah.
yeah, I'm not looking forward to it. But what I am looking forward to, the first segue of the night, is the Ball State men's basketball team. They will be in action on Friday, taking on the Western Michigan Broncos for Muncie out. Hope everybody can come. But the Cardinals continued their winning ways on actually last night, winning 77 to 68 over the Northern Illinois Huskies. Trey Moses had 23 and 12 with 3 blocks in the victory. Robert, we're getting close to MAC tournament play. Do you see any weaknesses with this team? And if you do, what are they?
Well, after going to the game on Saturday, they were playing a top-ranked Toledo team, and I just saw them playing with a lot of confidence and a lot of poise. And not only have they won the last 7 of 8, but they have 4 straight games with 7-0 runs to start the game. And I think that's been really crucial to their victories. They've found a way to, score early and score often.
Yeah, that's definitely been a strength as of late. I would say the one weakness, and it really doesn't have anything to do with X's and O's at all, but you got to get Ball State away from Worthen Arena and the state of Indiana because they've only lost one game at home all season to Buffalo, and that was when we were facing quite a bit of adversity on our own team. So we've changed, we've evolved, and really Ball State looks very dangerous. So it'll be fun to attend the Muncie out on Friday. Hopefully we can get that last home win before we go on the road for 2 more. We'll actually play Northern Illinois again to end the season, and we'll also travel to Central Michigan. So that's the outlook for Ball State basketball. Switching over to the U.S. Women's hockey team in the Olympics, they will battle Canada tonight for the Olympic gold medal. Robert, it's been 20 years since we won one of these things. Who do you have?
Well, okay. Canada won gold in Sochi versus the United States. And, in the semifinal game on Monday, the United States shut out Finland. They won 5-0. And I think the Americans are in full pursuit of revenge. And, you're right. They haven't won in 20 years, but we've been the top-ranked team. We have the talent, and we've lost 3 gold medal games since. And the team has choked in the final game, but I really think that semifinal gave them the fuel to the fire that they need to close out the game in the third period. I think it's going to be a close game. Canada will look strong early, but I think the United States will be able to cap off the game with a victory and get that gold medal.
Yeah, I sure hope so. And they join a long list of teams that can't seem to get over the hump, even though everything is in their favor. I don't think I need to list those. But yeah, most definitely, we'd love to see the U.S. women finally capture the gold. They've been around, the top of the women's hockey standings, and all throughout, last 20 years and then some. I mean, we're one of the hockey powers in the women's game. And so in Canada, the U.S., it's always a tremendous rivalry, a natural rivalry, and we will look forward to that one. Lastly, before we get into talk about the NBA, the MLB has instituted a few pace of play changes for the upcoming season. Robert, you want to fill us in on those?
Yeah, the MLB is really taking a look at making the games a little shorter so that fans can stay in tune with the game and not get so bored so quickly. And it's something that I've heard a lot from non-baseball watchers. There's a little bit of talk about, we need to make the games shorter. The attention span of any viewer is really short. And for the MLB, they had announced a pitch clock, giving the pitcher a certain amount of time to deliver the ball, and they are trying to get new phone lines connected to the video rooms and the dugout, so that they'll limit the ability of teams to steal signs and mound visits. Just a lot of different ways to shorten the game. Commercial breaks are going to go from about 3 minutes to 2. And a minute doesn't seem like too much, but in the grand scheme of things, when there's a pitching change or changing between innings, half innings, there's going to be a lot of time given back to the game. And, the mound visits, like I talked about, has been something that a lot of people have, taken to heart, especially Wilson Contreras. He was a strong advocate against the pace of play change, along with a few of the Cubs, players, John Lester included. Joe Madden was heated about it. And for Wilson Contreras, he is talking about how he wants to do anything and everything to keep the MLB out of, taking time away from mound visits. And especially with Yu Darvish coming on the team, Contreras is really, talking about, hey, we need Darvish to get back into, conversation. We need to talk him down. He gets riled up, and he was saying, what about a tight game or an extra inning game? And you have to go out there. So I think he was making some solid points about why there's the amount of mound visits that they have and why the catchers need to go out and talk to the pitchers. So
yeah, well, we all know how much Wilson Contreras loves to go out to the mound. I mean, the guy lives out there, and I can see that. I mean, I'm a baseball guy, and it does frustrate me from time to time. But at the same, on the same point of view, I think that, it's probably necessary for him to go out there, and with Darvish being a new pitcher on the staff, that brings up a tremendous point. Now, Contreras made the comment that he's not going to let these pace of play rule changes affect the way he goes about doing his business. That could come into conflict with the new rules, and it's going to be one of those rules that's policed by the umpires, keeping a running total of however many mound visits are made throughout the game. And when Contreras goes out there to visit the mound a seventh time, we'll see what happens, but he says he'll do anything for the team. I would also say that getting thrown out of a ball game is not best for the team. You're talking about one of the premier catchers in the league.
Exactly. He's saying that he'll do whatever it takes. He'll pay the price, but sometimes it's not just the fine. He's going to get kicked out of the game, and they need Contreras. You saw when he went out with an injury, how much it impacted the team. And they need a catcher with all that knowledge and presence that he has, because he really came into his own last year. And in this next year, he's going to need to stay in the game as much as possible, stay healthy to if the Cubs want to make another run at a World Series.
Yeah, Contreras was one of those guys that got his offensive game figured out as well, so they would really miss that. And in addition, his presence behind the plate is one that goes unparalleled across the league. The only people that I really come to the top of my mind are Buster Posey, and Brian McCann used to be a guy that was a calming presence behind the plate. But Wilson Contreras is really one of those young talents at catcher that we'll see. He's a fiery guy. We will see what his reaction is. But you did bring up a solid point about non-baseball fans and almost commercializing the game. And we're trying to talk about, shortening the length of games during the regular season. They're getting out of hand. I think we all can agree that they're starting to drag on. Beyond 3 hours now is the time frame we're talking about. But I will say that I feel like the core fan base of the MLB has been, they played Little League. They've been baseball fans their entire lives. I don't know if you can just take all these little things, say, yeah, they add up to about 10 minutes, and implement them and say that the game hasn't changed, because the game will change. Pitch clock, and then you say, well, when does it stop? When can we have a certain amount of pickoff moves to first base consecutively? When can we do this? When can we do that? The first major thing that hit baseball a few years back was replay. Granted, everybody came to a consensus that it was necessary, and I think it is a good thing for the game overall, because really our Galarraga's perfect game, Jim Joyce messed up the call at first base, and that's really what got the conversation started about replay. It was great that they instituted it. And then we're having the conversations about how much is too much replay. So these kinds of conversations will always be present in and around baseball. But you talk about the new rules. What rules do you think are good, and which ones do you think maybe go a little too far?
Replay is one that I actually really like. I don't know if I would stretch it as far as balls and strikes, and they haven't yet, but sometimes there's calls that I'm like, man, if they had replay on one of those strikes, it could have changed the entire game. And you know, replay is really good for the fact that it could change home run calls. It can change, tagging first base, especially in that Galarraga game where he almost had that perfect game. If they had replay, they might have been able to turn it around. And that's a common factor in baseball games. And I think that replay is one that I like. I don't like shortening the commercials. There's really no point. You know, it gets a lot of revenue. So I don't know why baseball would try to eliminate that. Especially, you're right. They're trying to appeal to the non-baseball fan, but why?
Why? Right.
And they don't need to. Just like with a lot of different games, they're trying to commercialize it, and it doesn't make any sense because you know that those non-baseball fans are probably going to come back a couple times. Maybe in the playoffs, it'll be more prevalent to why they're trying to institute these changes. But in the regular season, I think everyone realizes that there's 162 games. If they want to do anything to make baseball a more interesting sport, then shorten the season, because 162 games is way too long. I even get tired of watching all of those games because it's tiring. It's every day that I have to go and check, oh, let's see if the Cubs won today. Because, and I'll get comments from other people saying, they play today? Yeah, they play every day. So I think something that they really need to focus on is the season length. I think 81 games would be a solid amount of time. And especially with breaks in between, you could limit some injuries that have been costly to the game in years past.
Right. You're talking about, taking down the season in half with the 81 games down from 162. But I think you're on the right track with shortening the length of the season as opposed to the game length, because you still want to keep the intensity of baseball. It's a great sport. People watch the World Series. It's high intensity stuff. But when you play 162 games, you have an off day once every 2 weeks. It does drag.
Right.
The dog days of July. They say that for a reason. Mm-hmm. So shortening the season, maybe not to 81, but I would say, in the 100 range, about something like that, would bring new viewers in that don't watch because the games are starting to mean a little bit more. Each and every game means something. They play so many division games, it's ridiculous. I mean, we're talking, you could say that the Cubs play the Cardinals, granted it's a rivalry, but 18 times in the year, you don't need to play 18 times.
Yeah, you already know the opponent. I would like to see more interleague matchups. I think that the amount of division games, like you said, is overbearing. I don't want to see the Cardinals and Cubs face off that many times. Although they're great games, especially with how the Cubs have come up in recent years and the Cardinals are consistently good. Same with the Brewers. I don't want to see them all the time. I want to see Cubs Red Sox. I want to see Cubs Yankees. I want to see those big matchups. I want to see Aaron Judge taking on Yu Darvish in next season's games. I mean, they may have that schedule lined up where they can play each other, but it's never a given.
I'm sure we'll continue this conversation some other time. Robert, we are not, unfortunately, the ones that make these decisions. It's not up to us. We can talk all we want. But yes, nonetheless, we'll be watching to see how these rule changes affect play in 2018. So we're going to take a short break. We'll be back in 30 seconds. We're going to talk some NBA All-Star Weekend. We'll be right back.
I want to make something of myself.
I want to succeed.
The National Guard recruiter helped me get where I wanted to go.
The Guard is providing me with paid training.
In the National Guard, I get money for college plus a steady paycheck.
In the Guard, I train near my home.
I'm there for my family, my community, and my country. And I'm proud to be a member of the National Guard.
Call 1-800-GO-GUARD and ask how you can get the education and job skills you need in the National Guard.
Sponsored by the Indiana National Guard, aired by the Indiana Broadcasters Association and this station.
And we're back just like that. Here on the Fantasy Express, we're going to get into the NBA. All-Star Weekend has come and gone. To recap, on Friday, we had the celebrity game. Didn't really watch that. I'm sure there was plenty of antics to go around with all the celebrities playing. But Team World, after that game on TNT, Team World destroyed Team USA in the Rising Stars Challenge. They beat them 155 to 124. Ton of defense, I know. I did learn one thing from this game, though. Bogdan Bogdanovic can shoot, and he can shoot from distance.
Yeah, in that game, I know Bogdanovic had a lot of threes. Team World had a lot of threes, and you have a lot of talent like Markkanen and Bogdanovic that can shoot those long-range games. And in that game, not just the shooting surprised me, but I learned just how great Team World is. And it's not just those players that I mentioned. It's how much they've really grown world talent. And international players are becoming a commodity now. And I know a few years back, it was like, oh, did the Knicks draft Porzingis? Why would they draft Kristaps Porzingis, who may be a bust? We don't know the international talent. We don't know. It's really skeptical. But, now that Team World has gotten that big game, and we've learned that stars like Porzingis and Embiid and Markkanen are coming into the game, it's really cool to see them take on Team USA.
Yeah, for certain, the foreign market has really grown in the NBA, and I know a lot of people were doubting the Porzingis pick when the Knicks selected him, and aside from the injury that he just suffered to his ACL, it's worked out. Can't say it hasn't. So the talent overseas is progressing at a nice clip, and apparently overtaking the talent that we produce here at home. The dunk contest. Donovan Mitchell defeated Larry Nance Jr. in the final round. Not a great dunk contest, but hey, I got my pick right. So
you definitely got your pick right. And what I was taking away from the dunk contest is Oladipo's performance. He wasn't coming up to par in his dunks. He missed a few. He had to do some retries. And, you get that every so often. But when you have three guys who are consistently dunking really well, putting on these awesome performances, and you have a guy, hometown guy, Indiana, Victor Oladipo, we were rooting for him because, we go to Ball State in Muncie, Indiana, but he really didn't show up like we wanted him to, and he doesn't need to because the Pacers are so good. And it was just really cool to watch the contest because there were really awesome dunks. My favorite dunks, Larry Nance Jr., he had a sick one-handed windmill. Man, I was getting out of my seat for that one. Dennis Smith Jr., he was my pick. He went to dunk and went between the legs midair. I was very surprised. I had Oladipo and Smith Jr. being in the final.
That's all right.
Not the case. It was Nance Jr. and Mitchell. But Mitchell, he had a Vince Carter tribute. I love whenever someone, tries that Vince Carter, 360, awesome, electrifying dunk, and he pretty much perfected it. Did you like any dunk in particular?
Yes, I did have a favorite. It was in the Rising Stars Challenge, actually. Donovan Mitchell passed the ball to himself, if you remember, and threw it down off the glass, defender in his face. That was incredible, seeing as though it was, during the course of a game, you didn't have all the cameras on you and the judging. That was the best dunk of the weekend, in my opinion. But no, yeah, it was an underwhelming dunk contest, but nevertheless, Donovan Mitchell prevailed. Devin Booker took down the field in the three-point shootout. Your thoughts on that one?
Well, you had Devin Booker in that. Well, you had Devin Booker and Klay Thompson. You took Klay Thompson in the end. I heard that you took Devin Booker last week, but you switched it up a little bit on me, and I was just surprised because both of your picks to be in the final were both in it, just like the slam dunk contest. I mean, you're really good at predictions. I'm kind of not up to par on those, but I had Kyle Lowry winning the 3-point shootout. I'm pulling for all the Raptors guys this year. I want Toronto to have a deep run into the playoffs, so I thought maybe this could start something that how they've been before All-Star break with the 7-game win streak, which we'll get into later, but something with a 3-point shootout or maybe getting DeMar DeRozan in a slam dunk contest might have gotten them a little bit into the second half of the season.
Yeah, we'll talk about the Raptors here in a little bit. But yeah, you make a good point. Kyle Lowry maybe doing well in the 3-point shootout would have been nice. Toronto's one of those teams that they have big names, but you typically don't. Around All-Star weekend, they play second fiddle to some of the Warriors guys, Cleveland, you name it. But yeah, most definitely, Devin Booker I think was a shock to a lot of people. He's got all the potential in the world. He's going to surprise, turn some heads this season. Maybe not. Because their team's not doing so well. But in years to come, he's going to be a guy to look out for. Maybe Mr. Curry's going to be back in that 3-point shootout next go around, and maybe can dethrone Mr. Booker. And last but certainly not least, the All-Star game came down to the wire as Team LeBron edged Team Stephen. That's kind of weird to say. It should be Team Curry. It flows a little bit better.
Yeah.
148 to 145. Still high scoring, but more competitive.
Yeah, a few things. It was really cool to see the new NBA All-Star format. And, they're trying, again, to make it a little more interesting, like the MLB is trying to do with their games. But this game in particular was awesome. LeBron and Irving playing on the same team again. That was cool. And then Kevin Durant and Anthony Davis joining them. Like, having LeBron and Durant on the same team, I wouldn't, have ever seen that if it wasn't for this All-Star game, because Durant's in the West. LeBron may go to the West after the season, but, everyone's gone over to that conference. I was thinking before the game, there's not going to be much talent on both sides because everyone in the East, moved conferences. And with this new format, you get to see Harden and Curry with the Greek Freak and DeRozan. That's awesome. It's truly an all-star game. And, it's a revival of the game. It's not as boring as a Pro Bowl, and it's not as high stakes as the MLB All-Star game. But there's a lot of incentive. The league offered $50,000 more for each player on the winning team, $350,000 to the charity of the captain's choice. That's really good for the league and for the players because they're more competitive. They did score a lot, but not as much as 400 points like in previous years.
No, that gets a little out of hand. And I will say I'd rather be the NBA trying to figure out ways to improve your All-Star game rather than being the MLB. You're trying to figure out how people are going to watch your actual games, the ones that count. So yeah, I think the NBA did a really good job this year of trying to make things more competitive. Spicing things up a bit. You get to see some teammates that wouldn't normally be teammates. And, who knows, maybe budding rivalries come of this. But certainly a good weekend and, yes, more interesting than the Pro Bowl. I will give you that. So it was a good time. And now that the All-Star break is over, that means the last part of the NBA season will commence tomorrow, actually. Featuring the Washington Wizards taking on Cleveland and the Clippers traveling to Golden State in the nightcap. So we've already got some pretty important games starting back up here in a little bit. As we look at the standings now, Toronto's on top in the East, a little bit above Boston. Do you see them holding on to their top spot and taking down the 1 seed in that conference?
Well, I would have to say yes, because Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan are one of the best backcourts in the game, and they're actually getting the recognition that they deserve, especially with the team's affairs right now. They are in first place, They have DeRozan at 23.7 points per game, 5 assists per game, and 3 or close to 4 rebounds per game. And they won 7 in a row heading into the All-Star break. I see you made a note here. And in that 7-game win streak, the closest margin of victory other than their win over Miami was 15 points. They're dominating teams. And it's not just their starters. I saw some of their bench players contributing to the stats. CJ Miles, Delon Wright, Fred VanVleet. I haven't seen Fred VanVleet
since
in a while.
his days at Wichita State. Yeah. Yes.
And Norman Powell. So I think that Toronto looks really good heading into the second half, and I think they're going to take that momentum and really build on it going into the playoffs.
Yeah, well, they're 2 games up right now. I mean, you've got impressive victories at the Hornets. They beat the Celtics by 20 before the break. Memphis, a solid win by 15. Portland, a Western Conference team, they beat them by 25 at home. So you're not talking about, Phoenix coming into Toronto or the Hawks or the Magic or teams like that. I mean, they've been playing quality opponents and beating them badly. And this, you start to have the conversation of, well, does the big 3, format and kind of ideal necessarily work? Because I wouldn't say Toronto has a big 3. You could make the case that it might be like Kyle Lowry, DeMar DeRozan, and used to be Jonas Valanciunas. Now it's kind of Ibaka in the mix. What do you make of that?
Well, I don't think you necessarily need the big 3. It tremendously helps your chances of making a deep run in the playoffs. But if you have you need 2 guys. But if you have those 2 guys that make a big impact on your team, like with the Cavaliers when they had LeBron and Kyrie, you can't really count Kevin Love as another addition to the big 3 because they kind of left him out. But if you have 2 solid guys, I think that helps your chances of going even further.
Yes.
Because with a big 3, you can make the playoffs. But if you have those 1 or 2 players that rises to the occasion, rises above it, then you can have a solid showing in the playoffs.
And I think it's more important when you can put those 2 players in the pick and roll in the fourth quarter.
Oh, yeah.
And, not all teams can do that. DeRozan and Lowry, I mean, you're talking about 2 guards. So it might be a little more difficult for them to make it work down the stretch in games. But Toronto, they're 3rd in points per game and 7th in points allowed. Those are fantastic numbers. People always joke about, the Eastern Conference just doesn't, hold up to the rest of the NBA. I beg to differ. I mean, those are great numbers. Granted, they're in first place. There's a reason that they're there. You look to the stats and they bear that out. But yeah, promising statistics. And I think Toronto can keep that lead in the East. So we'll switch over to the West now. A lot of people consider it the more intriguing league. It is a battle at the top spot between Golden State and Houston. When 82 games have been played, what team is at the top of the chain for you?
Well, to start the season, it would have had to been Golden State because they've won 3 out of the last 4 times, and they have, really gotten a lot of talent, not just with their big 3 like we talk about, but now they have a big 4 with Kevin Durant after last season, and he was the MVP last year. So you get a lot of play with the Warriors, but the Rockets, when I saw the deal where Chris Paul went to Houston, I thought to myself, you have 2 guards there that are going to kind of do the same thing, pass, score, and how would they work together? But they've worked together really well, and they shoot a ton of threes. And that's why I'm going to go with Houston, because of their game. It takes a lot of threes to beat the 3. And the Warriors were the pillar of the 3-point game, and now Houston has taken that away from them. And I think that they are the new kings of the West. I can't really say that since they haven't dethroned the Warriors just yet in the playoffs, but seeing their play throughout the season, they've taken more threes than twos throughout the entire season, and currently half of their shots are behind the arc. So it's really cool to see their up and coming.
Yeah, it's funny because you're talking about two different teams here, but both high scoring. Houston and Golden State always at the top of the league in scoring effort, but they do it in different ways. In a sense, you've got Golden State. They can post up Kevin Durant, or they can, Curry can bring the ball up the court, and Thompson can run around, on some screens. Draymond can facilitate at the top. Whereas Houston, you have, James Harden, who, he's got it in the pick and roll mostly, and everybody else is stationed around the arc, and he makes it work. And, Chris Paul, another guy that when he came to Houston, a lot of people were saying, well, he's pretty ball dominant to play with James Harden. You mentioned that, how are these two going to coexist? And it's been working. Paul's still getting his assists. Harden's playing very well after coming back from his injury. He was a little rusty there for a little bit, but he's gotten back to form. And I've always said it. I watch the Warriors a lot. I follow them very closely. And Houston's just, I wouldn't say they've had their number, but they've always been so close. And this year would not surprise me if, they finally overtook Golden State, because Cleveland, they made a lot of moves at the deadline. That was the rivalry. It was Golden State and Cleveland. Now, I think, Golden State needs to look closer to home first before they start worrying about the team in the East, because Houston seems to be the imminent threat at this point. And I think that they could carry on and potentially dethrone Golden State at the top of the Western Conference. However, their schedule down the stretch is a lot more difficult than Golden State. So I'm gonna say Golden State will beat them out for that first seed. But you also look at the West, and I want to know your thoughts, Robert, on the what a lot of people referred to as the battle of the tank, because we have 7 teams with under 20 wins right now if you combine both conferences. That's a logjam at the bottom, but not so much at the top of these conferences. You've got usually, 2 or 3 teams competing, but everyone wants that first pick. So does this make, we talked about the big 3, but does this make super teams and the big 3, that we're seeing a lot of just an overall bad thing for the league? Because all these teams, to me, you're tanking because, okay, well, we don't want to get good yet. Let's have LeBron, kind of age and get out of the league. And, oh, no, Golden State has Curry. We're not going to win now. That's a lot of the mindset going around some of these lesser teams. So is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, like you said, when we looked at the offseason, all the signings, all the movement from east to west, you think to yourself, well, there's a lot of Eastern Conference teams that are going to be vying for that first pick so that they can get some talent on their roster. But when you think about it, not all of these teams need that first pick. They have talented rosters. Not everyone needs to revamp and rebuild. There's always 2 or 3 teams that need to, but you look at someone like the Dallas Mavericks, they have Dennis Smith Jr. and
Harrison Barnes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They could use someone else to make a big 3 potentially in the future, but I don't think they need to do it right now. I saw Mark Cuban said, we need to tank. You don't need to tank. There's teams that definitely need to. If we look at the NFL, the Cleveland Browns always need to tank. And if we look at the NBA, the Bulls right now should be trying to tank, and they're right outside those bottom 7, which confuses me because they're trying to win right now. And I get it. You want to see Chris Dunn playing with Zach LaVine, Lauri Markkanen, Bobby Portis. They don't need anybody, but going into the season, we all thought they definitely need someone. They need to shore up the small forward, which they still need to do. And I'm really getting on their case about it because they're at 20 or so wins and they're not in the bottom of the rankings. And as much as I love tanking in a video game and trying for the top pick so I can mold the drafted prospect and make him a superstar, it's not as fun watching the team struggle and become so predictable that they're going to lose. And it's not just that they're losing by a large margin. They're not even trying. The coaches are going out and saying, you need to lose. Give up the possession. You can't do that. You have to let these players, get in touch with their ball skills in the NBA. If you have a prospect, they need to find themselves, but they can't do that in a team where the management is saying you need to lose.
Yeah, well, you brought up the Bulls. and where they are in the Eastern Conference. I mean, there's 3 teams below them: Brooklyn, Orlando, and Atlanta. And I would say you're right. The Bulls, of all the teams, probably could use that tank a little bit more. And I think a lot of the organizations that are at the bottom of the standings at the moment are tanking because they want to build an elite team. Boston kind of came out of their shell finally when they got Kyrie, because they were sitting on a lot of draft picks. They really won that Brooklyn trade from a few years back. They had a lot of guys, and they were just, it was almost like they were sitting back there and trying to pick their time. When are we going to come out, and when are we going to compete at a high level? They took the risk with Gordon Hayward. Nobody can predict an injury quite like that one. But Boston finally made that decision. We don't know when a team like Phoenix will say, all right, we're going to add a veteran. Here we go. We're going to compete now. Because you also don't want to waste these early years. Granted, it's great to get these younger players experience, but you don't want to waste these years at the same time. So it's a tough balance between the two, kind of thought processes. But we'll see how it plays out. Definitely, jumbled up there at the bottom of the conference standings for both the East and the West. If the playoffs started today, though, I want to ask you, what would be, in your opinion, the most intriguing first-round matchups in the East and the West?
All right, so in the West, I have the Timberwolves and Thunder because, you have Andrew Wiggins, Jimmy Butler, and Karl Anthony Towns going up against another big 3 in Carmelo Anthony, Russell Westbrook, and Paul George. So that would be awesome because they're the 4-5, and out of 4 or 5 matchups, you always expect them to be pretty close. And in years past, it's kind of been, either really one-sided or there's a team in one of those seeds that could be somewhere else in the conference. But going into the season, I thought to myself, yeah, it's going to be Oklahoma City and Minnesota in those middle spots that are going to be trying to, whoever wins that matchup is going to be a big test for who comes out as a first or second seed.
Yeah, talk about tanking. Maybe one of those teams might want to tank to not play the other. But you're also talking about if you don't win, you're not playing each other at the 4-5. You're either playing San Antonio, Golden State, or Houston. So pick your poison if you're OKC or Minnesota. I actually think that the 3-6 right now is San Antonio and Denver. The old guys versus the young guys. San Antonio has seen some turnover. Parker's coming off the bench. Popovich is up to his old game. Really their roster, if you look at it, you wonder, how is Greg Popovich holding this team together? But he is. He's third in the standings. I think that Denver has a lot of offensive potential. Jamal Murray's a great player. Gary Harris, they're all young. And then you add Nikola Jokic. I will say the best big man that nobody talks about in the NBA is Nikola Jokic. So that would be a very good matchup, him versus Aldridge, I would like to see. In the East, looking at the conference standings the way they sit, I'm going to give the edge to the 3-6 matchup. I'm sticking with the 3-6 here as well. Cleveland and Milwaukee. Want to see if Giannis is up to the test of containing LeBron.
Yeah, for me, I'm going to have to go with another 4-5. I'm going to head up and say the Wizards versus the Pacers. That looks like it's going to be a fun matchup. You have another solid backcourt. I talked about Lowry and DeRozan, but Beal and Wall have been one of the best backcourts in a long time coming for both the Raptors and the Wizards getting this awesome backcourt. And they're going to be playing a resurrected Pacers. We thought the worst when Paul George left, but they got Oladipo in return, and he's become one of the best stars. I talked earlier about he wasn't, playing up to par in the slam dunk contest, but he is leading the Pacers. They're in the 5th spot. I wouldn't have expected that. I was thinking maybe they're going to try and go for the 8th, compete against the Pistons for that, and they were for a while, but they've been playing really well as of late.
No, and if you were living under a rock for the past year and didn't know that Paul George went to the Thunder, you would have thought, oh, George is still on the Pacers. At 5th spot in the East, nobody would have predicted that. That would be a great matchup. And even, the 1-8, right now, the way Toronto's going, I think they would handle Miami. But 2-7, Boston and Philadelphia, trust the process. Embiid's all behind it. A bunch of young talent there for the 76ers. And Boston, they could be vulnerable. So I think that's a very good potential postseason matchup. And really, the Eastern Conference overall has a lot more of the intriguing matchups. Or at least the way they sit now. So the season kicks off again tomorrow night. We'll see the last 20 or so games play out. The NFL draft is just around the corner. When we come back on the Fantasy Express, we will talk a little bit about some of the mock drafts that are out there and talk about the Colts pick. So you're listening to the Fantasy Express on WCRD 91.3. Keep it here.
You have any idea how fast you were going back there?
Oh, sorry, officer. I was just listening to WCRD and 91.3 FM.
I don't see a problem here. Carry on.
Only in the forest can you see this. But nothing beats the moment you see that.
Cool!
That's your child's eyes opening up to a world of possibilities.
There are some moments only the forest can inspire. Find yours at discovertheforest.org. Learn about forests near you and discover cool things to do when you go. And you might just see this. Visit discovertheforest.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service and the Ad Council.
Mel Kiper's Mock Draft 2.0 came out just a little bit ago, and to a little bit of surprise, too, Josh Allen is at the top. He's going first overall to the Cleveland Browns. Robert, he's the guy, I know he's your guy, but were you expecting number one?
No, I was actually expecting either Josh Rosen or Sam Darnold to take the 1 or 2. But, it's Josh Allen and Saquon Barkley. And as it should be, I think Josh Allen is one of the best quarterbacks in the draft, not only because of his strong arm, but how consistent he played. And I know it was with Wyoming, but some of those guys from the smaller schools really turn out to be some of the best quarterbacks. You look at Carson Wentz coming out of North Dakota State. So he really embodies what you look for in a strong quarterback at a small school, and beating up on all these other schools, but really making an impact in the NFL because he's able to, he was able to get all of the skills and training that he needed, and he wasn't playing the big games like some of the other guys like Sam Darnold and Baker Mayfield. Although Baker Mayfield, I was really surprised to see him at the number 6. And I mean, Sam Darnold too, after last season, I thought he would be ranked up really high, but at his play, I thought he would be late first round, early second, and Baker Mayfield maybe even third. I didn't expect all these quarterbacks to be at the top like they are.
Yeah, it's definitely a quarterback-concentrated draft. You touched on it. Saquon Barkley, number 2 to the Giants is the projection. Bradley Chubb, number 3, defensive end from NC State. We'll talk about him in a little bit. Sam Darnold at 5 to the Broncos. So if you draft Darnold, you're probably not bringing in Cousins, but we'll see. Baker Mayfield, number 6 to the Jets. And then just outside the top 10, we have Josh Rosen at 11 to the Dolphins, even though Tannehill's probably going to be back. So that's an interesting pick for Miami. But, you see that the order that they're in now. Would you make any changes? Do you think that, to me, Rosen's a little bit out of the picture compared to where I think he should be.
No, you're right. Josh Rosen, Josh Allen should be top 1 and 2. Although, I said that Darnold I thought was going to be up there, but out of talent and potential, I think Rosen and Allen definitely take those top 2 spots. Bradley Chubb, that's interesting that the Colts want him at number 3.
Yeah.
I mean, Mel Kiper Jr., he's usually really good about this stuff, but to me, I don't think the Colts need a DN. They need a offensive lineman because Andrew Luck is getting beat up back there.
Well, and the reason we're going to go off of this mock draft, and who knows, we do many mock drafts before it finally we finally get to the first overall selection, and the clock's Cleveland's on the clock. But this is the latest one, so we're going to go with it. You mentioned Chubb for the Colts. He had a great time at NC State, 72 tackles just last season. That was tied for 6th amongst all defensive linemen. 23 tackles for a loss, 10 sacks. That's tied for 10th at his position. So not even defensive end, but just defensive lineman as well. And then a forced fumble. So, some solid, impressive numbers from Mr. Chubb. But since this draft is loaded with quarterbacks, you mentioned the fact that Carson Wentz, he came from North Dakota State. They are a powerhouse in their division. They're not Division I. But football is a huge thing there. Is that different, comparing him to a Josh Allen who played at Wyoming? It is a Division I school, but it's a lesser Division I school. You see what I'm kind of saying? It's weird because they're in a smaller conference. The Mountain West is not as competitive, and maybe it's an advantage for Wentz to have played, even though it's D2, at a top premier school that's in the championship hunt every single season.
No, you're right, and Carson Wentz was able to get that championship experience. You get to see how well he plays in those big games. Josh Allen, you don't really get a sense of those big games because he's in the Mountain West with Boise State and all the other Mountain West teams. But
yeah, let's play. How many Mountain West teams can Robert name?
Let's see.
Let's go.
Utah,
Pac-12.
They changed. Okay. All right. See, I'm thinking early Mountain West. Okay. Boise State, Wyoming, Nevada.
Yeah.
Okay.
Should be. Let me pull this up.
All right. No. Football conferences have gotten all out of whack. I forgot Nebraska is even in the Big Ten.
You mentioned an old football conference that has gone extinct, the WAC. That was a thing.
Let's see. Probably Montana.
This is fun.
No, that doesn't make any sense. Washington State. No, they're in the Pac-12.
They're in the Pac-12.
This is pointless. The Mountain West sucks.
Yeah, well, Mountain West, you've got Boise State, Wyoming, Colorado State, Air Force, Utah State, New Mexico, Fresno State, San Diego State, UNLV, Nevada, Hawaii, San Jose State. I totally got all that from the top of my head. But no, joking aside, that conference, not a premier conference. And Josh Allen, Wyoming, they finished second. And they're in the Mountain Division, so they didn't even win their division. Will be interesting to see how that translates. But the Colts won't be worrying as long as Andrew Luck is on track to start, which nobody seems to be too confident, but they're not doubting it anymore. It seems like Luck will be ready to give it a go, but they won't be trying to trade back for a team that wants a quarterback, I wouldn't think. So the Colts wouldn't be in the running for Baker Mayfield at 6. That wouldn't be who they're trading back for. But Chubb being at 3, maybe a little high for him. They switched. The Colts did in the offseason just recently with their new hires to a 4-3 base defense. Something that I think suits them a lot better than the 3-4 because they've been struggling for years to find linebacker depth, and it just didn't make any sense. Yeah, let's go play the 3-4 when we have all this talent at defensive line, D tackle and D end, and we don't have the players to suit up in the linebacker positions, especially on the outside. So I like the switch. Then you talk about how would Chubb fit into that, and Chubb, for the most part, they played 4-down linemen at NC State, but he ate up a double team almost every play when he was out there. So I think Chubb would probably be more valuable in the 3-4, which they're not in anymore. So you maybe trade back, and I think I saw Quentin Nelson from Notre Dame, the left guard, is projected 7th overall, I believe, to Tampa Bay. So do you see a way for Indy to trade back and maybe snatch Nelson in exchange for for somebody going up and maybe getting a quarterback too early, like the Bears, if you can sucker somebody into doing that again?
Yeah, no, they should trade back and get an offensive lineman. I don't know if they will. If they do keep the third pick, I'd say don't take a defensive lineman. If Saquon Barkley drops back, take him, because they need someone other than Frank Gore. And, the Colts could really use that extra help to, get some pressure off of Andrew Luck. That's the main point in this whole draft for the Colts. They need to find ways to protect Andrew Luck because he's gotten really bad injuries recently, and get some pressure off of him. And I think a running back or offensive lineman can do that for him.
Yeah, the Colts are in an interesting position at number 3. They're going to have to do a lot of wheeling and dealing on draft night. You're not going to know who's going to go first and second overall unless we get news that, sometimes that happens where, okay, this team's committed to this guy. We're going to have two quarterbacks go off the board. We'll have Barkley. We'll take him there. Or, hey, the top quarterback and Barkley are off the board. Maybe it's better suited for us to trade back. Maybe a team will decide to throw a little bit too much at us. We'll take that, all the picks that come with it. And Nelson, a solid lineman. I've seen a lot of tape on him. He's got a high motor, quickness off the ball at the top of the charts, and super physical, has great size. Reminds me of a Martin, those guys having played at Notre Dame as well. So definitely a good pedigree for the Fighting Irish, and Quentin Nelson's no exception. Would not be a bad pick. Shore up the interior of that offensive line next to Costanzo, and he could probably even play right guard if they needed. So a versatile player potentially in Quentin Nelson. But talking about wheeling and dealing, we're talking about the MLB and free agency. Can you believe baseball season's almost here?
No, I can't. It just seems like yesterday that it was 70 degrees in Muncie, but yesterday it was a big wintry mix, and it's a lot of snow, and there's still ice in certain areas. It's flooding now. So yeah, we are getting into the spring, and spring training is always fun to watch. See the talent that you acquired. I can't wait to see you, Darvish, throw a couple innings for the Cubs. What are you most excited for with baseball?
I'm most excited for the awkward numbers that some of these guys are going to be wearing. I always enjoy seeing number 79 come up to bat for a team or something like that. So that's always fun. And yeah, seeing some talent. Tim Tebow. We'll see some of him with the Mets. We'll probably get into that discussion next week because that's a very intriguing and hot topic. Sandy Alderson making comments about him potentially coming up in the middle part of the year onto the major league team. We shall see if the XFL has anything to say about that. But anyways, the first full slate of games for the spring is scheduled for Friday. We will make our predictions on the show here in a little bit next week, most likely, talking about the regular season and front runners for the World Series. There are a number of free agents that are still out on the market. We're getting into the spring. Usually you want those guys to be a part of your team. You're not going to see big names like Arrieta and Mike Moustakas out there in the early spring games, but they're still free agents. Lance Lynn, Alex Cobb, two solid pitchers, Carlos Gonzalez, an outfielder for the Rockies, and then finally, among the notables at least, Greg Holland, a closer also for the Rockies. So where do you think some of these guys might end up?
For Jake Arrieta, I would like to see him go to the Nationals, not because I want the Nationals to be really close to beating the Cubs potentially for a World Series, but I think he would fit in really well with that rotation. They could use another guy, and they might compete with the Cubs and probably the Dodgers and the Astros for the best rotations in baseball. I think Arrieta could find a home there. Moustakas, I don't know. Maybe the Rays. I mean, the Rays are looking for a lot of talent.
They've made some very questionable decisions now that you bring that up. So that, yeah, I could see that. Dickerson, they designated him for free. Can you believe that?
No, especially because they made a case for Dickerson the year before trying to get him, and they finally did get him, and they DFA him for CJ Cron from the Angels. Doesn't make any sense. I don't know what the Rays are doing. I mean, we don't really need to know what they're doing because the East is pretty much handled by the Red Sox and the Yankees. But regardless, there've been so many trades and free agent pickups in the MLB as of late, namely Eric Hosmer and Yu Darvish signing huge contracts. Is there any one of the recent deals that you like the most?
See, now in free agency, I mean, you're talking about the Angels getting Ohtani from overseas. That's an incredible pickup. And in addition, here, apparently the 10th ranked free agent of the offseason was Zach Cozart. I think, in terms of building a solid defensive infield and somebody that can give you a little bit of pop with his bat alongside a Mike Trout and an Ohtani if he can play every day, and Upton, Cozart for me is the biggest acquisition in the offseason, and not the biggest name, but I think the most crucial to his team.
Yeah, I like that Cozart signing. I would have liked Cozart on the Cubs playing alongside Javi Baez. I don't know if Addison Russell is really the long-term solution, and I heard that they were trying to trade him to the Orioles for their third baseman Machado. Yeah, couldn't come to mind right away, but
it's all right.
Machado would have played really well with the Cubs next to Bryant, Baez, and Rizzo.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that and if we look at just overall, JD Martinez did just sign a 5-year, $110 million contract with the Red Sox. He's going to provide them with a lot of much-needed power in the middle of their order. Boston, remember, just last year, they only hit 168 homers. That was well below league average and the worst in the American League. Is this a good fit for the Red Sox?
Yeah, they're missing David Ortiz. Whenever Ortiz retired, the Red Sox were thinking to themselves, we just lost a lot of pop.
The Bulls are still missing Michael Jordan, by the way.
Well, yeah, the Bulls aren't going to recover from that, and the Red Sox aren't going to recover from Ortiz, but JD Martinez is a big step forward, and they're going to be able to compete with the Yankees, who have two of the best home run hitters in the game in Aaron Judge and,
Stanton. There you go.
Stanton. It's been a long day.
No, that's fine.
But, yeah, I think the Red Sox and the Yankees are going to be playing for that home run title along with the Cubs. I think the Cubs are the best home run team in the league.
Yeah, and going back to the list of free agents here real quick, we had Arrieta and Moustakas. Lance Lynn and Alex Cobb, I think their asking prices are a little bit much. So they might not find a team right away. And if so, they might need to take a pay cut in order to do that. You've got Logan Morrison, again, somebody that the Rays kind of gave up on. Probably will not re-sign him, seeing as though they have Crone now to take over. Eric Hosmer with the Padres. There's an interesting one that I don't think a lot of people saw. I know the San Francisco Giants were in the running potentially to replace Brandon Belt and upgrade at first base with Hosmer, and that didn't go their way.
Yeah, Hosmer signed a big deal, and the Padres really need a veteran presence to, they have a lot of young talent in the farm system. They're one of the top teams when it comes to those young guys, and I think Hosmer is going to give them a lot of good play in the coming months.
Yeah, and I'm sure if it's anything like the NBA, we will see a lot of action come tomorrow, since we have our show tonight. I guarantee you something will happen or go down tomorrow, and we will
always does.
Yeah, it always seems to happen, and we'll update you next week on the Fantasy Express. Thanks for listening. Robert, you got anything to add?
Well, I got to go to the SGA debate tonight and cover that, so that's been on my mind a little bit. Got to do some reporting and social media stuff for that. But other than that, no, nothing really. I like the video project that you made that we talked about a little bit on the show, and it turned out really well.
Right. Robert Segovia is a busy man, but he will be here next week when we talk more baseball, NBA, and really any news that we deem worthy of the Fantasy Express. So thank you for listening, and we will see you next week.